People always talk about peak car, the point where cars were at their best. Before modern tech started taking away the fun, but after the old stuff became too unreliable or dated. Some people say it was the mid-2010s, cars like the Mark 7.5 Golf GT-R, but I actually think peak car came a generation earlier. Now I get why people point to the mid-2010s as the sort of time period that we hit peak car. Cars were fast, safe, comfortable, still offer a degree of enjoyment, but also, you know, you still have proper buttons on the dashboard to operate things, as well as including modern infotainment. So cars kind of reach a point where they're wholly modern in the way they are built and are like to operate, but they still maintain a little bit of that that sort of touchy-feely actual interaction that we, as drivers and as car enthusiasts, love. But for me, as I say, it's probably the generation before. So in the 2000s, we still had usable cars which were wholly modern in their, build quality and the way they function. But at the same time, they were still available with like manual gearboxes and, in fact, naturally aspirated engines that were probably, that was the point in time that we reached peak development. Now, peak car isn't the same as saying my favourite car or my favourite period of cars. There's already a video on this channel that I talk about the 90s cars as possibly being, my favourite, and are these the best time period for cars ever, because there's a difference between favourite and what you consider to be peak car. So yes, peak car for me is about, objectively speaking, where did we reach the point in which cars have sort of achieved everything we need them to do, but from a driving enthusiast's perspective, we're still enjoyable, and still something that we aspired and you'd want to get up on a weekend and go for a drive in. So if you think about the mid-2000s or even early 2000s, cars like the E46 M3 that came out I think in the year 2000. So although the E46 generation came out in the late 90s, can it kind of, the M3, can it kind of be considered more of a 2000s car, as that's, when that actually launched? But then even so, when we look at the likes of the E60 generation and the E90, they were still cars, although controversial at the time for their styling and the direction they'd gone into, they were very much so cars that still developed naturally aspirated engines and were still available with manual gearboxes. And that was still kind of pushed. I remember the M Division, I remember reading articles from the M Division talking about how what they're about is producing high revving naturally aspirated engines, and that was their forte sort of thing. So that was the last period in which this was still developed. It was the culmination of where that kind of mindset had taken us to. So for me, it kind of remains the point in time where cars had hit their peak. If we'd have carried on developing, maybe we'd reached the peak of where a naturally aspirated 3 litre straight six was likely to get in terms of power, efficiency and engagement. If you look at the Type R Honda models from that kind of era, you're looking at like the EP3, which was probably out in about 2000, maybe 2001, with the K20 engine, the DC5 in Japan, the S2000, which, although launched in the late 90s, is kind of a 2000s car, really. It ran all the way up until 2009 in the UK, I think. These were sports cars developed with naturally aspirated engines. As I say, the E90 generation M3 had its, naturally aspirated V8. If you look at Audis, you've got the RS4 with the naturally aspirated V8 again. Mercedes were chucking out that glorious V8. Didn't they have the big V8 that was called a 63, but it was actually a 6.2 litre? But yeah, there's lots of ways to look at it. You've got Renault with Renault Sport Clios, and you know, we started getting turbocharging as well, so the likes of this TT that I'm in today. But I don't want to talk about, you know, specific models, because it's the timing cars had reached, you know, peak as an overall. So for me, you got enough modernity in the 2000s. In fact, the 6 Series, the 630i I was driving, kind of highlights that itself, in that I made the point that it doesn't ever feel not, you know, like it wasn't modern. Yeah, you could stick someone in the car who didn't really know much about it, and I really believe that they could think they were in a completely modern new car, such as the build quality, such as the way it drives, such as how solid the car feels and everything like that. But it just has those nods to the past still, where we developed engines and powertrains and things like that, so that we had hydraulic steering still, and we had manual gearboxes and naturally aspirated engines. So for me, the 2000s represent that period whereby you still had readily available choice across the market, across the broad spectrum of cars, you know, all the way from little hot hatches, like I say, like the Civic Type R or Renault Sport Clios, all the way up to, you know, high performance stuff. If you look at Porsche, for instance, the 997 generation car and the facelift 972, still having hydraulic steering. So it's the last generation that we had that kind of more mechanical nature, but still a wholly modern drive and feel and sort of usability behind the car, safety, economy, everything really. It was kind of there. And beyond there, we've developed further into, the cars have got bigger and more complicated and more electronics, and now we're in the period of massive amounts of driver aids due to current legislation and things like that. And the inclusion of, you know, automatic gearboxes across the board. So I can understand how, you know, there's a video on Harry Metcalf's channel where they're talking about, with Clarkson, they're talking about the auto boxes and things that are in their cars and how amazing they are, and they just get the job done. And I can see that argument. You know, if you just look objectively at a car getting you from A to B and how good they've got, does it need to have developed much more than that? If you like combustion power cars, not really. But yeah, if I look at the marketplace as a whole, and I think of the types of cars that are available across the range, and I think of, you know, what the cars were able to do, not just the case of them being, you know, more cars that I'm personally, you know, I love, sort of thing, because otherwise, yeah, I'd end up back at the 90s. But I can see that the 2000s just moved it on that little step further in terms of usability and practicality, and just a more modern fit and finish. And the fact that you could get in a car from sort of the 2000s, I still think that a well looked after 330i from the 2000s, so an E90 gen, I mean preferably I'm going M52 because of the more robust nature of that engine than the M53. But you're getting that, if BMW launched that car today, would I need more, sort of thing? And the answer to me is no. The only thing that's lacking is the modern infotainment and things like that. But I'd rather have the option of a sharp manual gearbox and the fact that you've got that crisp naturally aspirated engine that still will deliver reasonable, you know, fuel efficiency, and actually is still ULEZ free in London and the likes of cities like that. Whereas a lot of the cars that were pushed in the 2010s afterwards, the sort of diesels and things that we were really pushed into driving through, it has to be said, tax incentives, so whereby they're really incentivized with lower tax and things, and now you can't drive them in London, and now they're considered, you know, oops, that was bad. And yet the old 3-litre petrol from mid-2000s is still, you know, qualifying, because actually it turns out it was a pretty good piece of engineering.
Contrast with today. Now, of course, modern cars are insanely fast. The performance numbers are mind-blowing, but so many of them have lost the feel. Everything's turbocharged, most steering is electric, gearboxes are DCT or auto, and interiors, well, they're just screens everywhere. Efficient, yes. Engaging, not really. And if it is modern, power crazy, high performance drivetrains you're after, then look no further than the Nissan GT-R. The R35 launched back in 2007, and yet is still in production 18 years later. To me, that just shows how far ahead the 2000s really were. The tech we think of as modern, dual-clutch gearboxes, advanced all-wheel drive, supercar performance, it was already there. The GT-R proves that that era had everything we needed. So yeah, for me, peak car was the 2000s. Enough modern comfort, but still that raw mechanical fun. But what about you? Do you think it was the 2010s with cars like the Mark 7 GTI? Or earlier in the 90s? Or maybe you think the best cars are being made right now? Let me know down in the comments. I'm really curious to know where you stand on this one. Thanks for watching.